The fateful encounter. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban streets, painting the pavement in hues of gold and amber. Dr. Ethan Collins gripped the steering wheel of his sedan, his thoughts drifting toward the long day ahead. His schedule was packed with patient consultations, follow-ups, and an upcoming surgical procedure that required his full attention. But for now, the morning commute offered a brief moment of peace, a rare quiet before the daily storm of hospital duties. As he drove past a row of aging brick houses and towering oak trees, something caught his eye. A small figure crumpled on the sidewalk, partially hidden in the shadow of a bus stop bench. A child. Ethan's pulse quickened. His foot instinctively pressed the brake as he pulled over to the curb, his medical instincts overriding everything else. With swift movements, he grabbed his emergency kit from the passenger seat and rushed out of the car, his breath coming faster than usual. The crisp morning air bit at his skin, but his focus remained locked on the boy lying motionless on the pavement. The child, no older than 8, had dark skin, his face contorted in discomfort. His clothes, an oversized t-shirt and faded jeans, were rumpled and slightly dirty, suggesting he'd been outside for some time. His small chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Ethan knelt beside him, placing 2 fingers on the boy's neck to check his pulse, fast but faint. He pressed the back of his hand to the child's forehead, frowning at the burning heat radiating from his skin. Fever, dehydration, possible infection. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said gently, his voice calm but firm. "Can you hear me?" The boy's eyelids fluttered weakly, his lips parted, his voice barely a whisper. "Daniel. Your name is Daniel?" Ethan asked, leaning closer. A small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay, Daniel. I'm Dr. Collins, and I'm going to help you, all right." He scanned the deserted street, his frown deepening. No parents, no friends, no one searching for him. Where had this child come from? And why was he alone? Ethan had no time to waste. Daniel's condition was worsening by the second. He needed immediate medical attention. With practiced ease, Ethan slipped an arm under the boy's legs and the other behind his back, lifting him carefully. Daniel's body was far too light, his ribs noticeable even through the thin fabric of his shirt. Malnourished. Another red flag. As Ethan carried the boy to his car, Daniel's head lolled against his chest, his shallow breaths sending a pang of urgency through the doctor's gut. He gently placed the boy across the back seat, using his jacket as a makeshift pillow. "Hold on, buddy," Ethan murmured as he slid into the driver's seat and started the car, flicking on his hazard lights. The hospital was 15 minutes away. He would make it there in 10. The ER hustle. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open with a soft whoosh as Ethan rushed inside with Daniel in his arms. The hospital's sterile scent filled his nose, but today it felt different. Urgency pulsed through his veins. Heads turned. Nurses and doctors paused mid-task. Dr. Collins, a nurse, Martinez, met him halfway, concern flickering across her face as she took in the sight of her colleague cradling a young patient. "What happened?" "Unknown medical emergency," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. "Found him unconscious on the street. High fever, rapid pulse, dehydration. No guardian in sight." Martinez nodded, springing into action. "Exam room 2 is open. Let's go." Ethan laid Daniel on the examination table, adjusting the boy's small frame into a more comfortable position. His skin was pale under the fluorescent lights, his breath still shallow. "We need fluids and a full panel," Ethan ordered, unbuttoning the child's shirt to check for any visible injuries. Within seconds, the room was alive with movement. An IV drip was set up, a blood pressure cuff wrapped around Daniel's thin arm. Dr. Elisa Grant, the head of pediatrics, entered, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. "What do we have?" Ethan quickly briefed her while adjusting the pulse oximeter. malnourished, likely an infection, possible respiratory distress, he summarized. Dr. Grant nodded. Let's get a chest X-ray and abdominal scans, just in case, and we need to locate his parents. Ethan glanced at the small hospital bracelet still on Daniel's wrist. It bore the name of Washington Elementary School. A starting point. An unsettling discovery. An hour later, the blood test results arrived. Ethan scanned the numbers on the tablet, his stomach tightening with concern. High white blood cell count. Severe dehydration. Infection markers off the charts. Whatever Daniel was battling, it wasn't mild. We need to act fast, Dr. Grant said, reviewing the same numbers. This could be sepsis. Ethan exhaled sharply. Sepsis in a child this small was dangerous, potentially fatal. As they prepped Daniel for emergency treatment, a call came through from hospital administration. We've located his mother, the administrator informed them. She's on her way. Relief coursed through Ethan, but it was short-lived. Because when Daniel's mother arrived, panting, eyes wild with panic, she nearly collapsed upon seeing her son. Daniel, she sobbed, rushing to his bedside. Ethan stepped forward. Miss Parker. She turned to him, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. Please, please save him. And then Ethan saw it. That strange flicker of familiarity. A sense of recognition deep within him, though he couldn't place it. Why did he feel like he had seen this woman before? And why did he feel an unshakable connection to the small, fragile boy he had just staved? A sense of unease settled in his chest. Something about Daniel's presence stirred something long buried inside of him. Something that, 20 years from now, would change his life forever. Echoes of the past. The beeping monitors provided a steady rhythm in the dimly lit hospital room. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, and the pale glow of the overhead lights cast long shadows across the walls. Dr. Ethan Collins stood near the foot of the hospital bed, watching the frail child who lay unconscious before him. His pulse remained erratic, his skin still feverish despite the IV fluids coursing through his veins. But Ethan's focus wasn't just on Daniel's medical condition. It was on the inexplicable feeling gnawing at his gut. There was something eerily familiar about this boy, a connection that felt deeper than mere coincidence. Miss Parker sat beside the bed, gripping her son's small hand as silent tears streaked down her face. Her shoulders trembled, and Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that only came from years of struggle. Miss Parker, Ethan began softly, can you tell me what happened? How long has Daniel been sick? The woman sniffled, brushing away her tears before nodding. It started a few weeks ago. He complained about stomach aches, but I thought it was just a virus. Then he got weaker, more tired, but I couldn't afford to take him to the doctor. Her voice cracked. I work 2 jobs. Money is tight. I kept telling myself I'd take him next week, but next week never came. Ethan felt a familiar ache settle in his chest. He had seen this story unfold countless times. Parents working tirelessly, sacrificing everything, yet still unable to provide the basic medical care their children needed. Miss Parker, you have nothing to be ashamed of, he reassured her. You did the best you could. She nodded weakly, but guilt still clouded her face. Where's Daniel's father? Ethan asked gently. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her lips. Long gone. Left before Daniel was even born. We don't have anyone else, just each other. Ethan's fingers tightened around the clipboard in his hands. Something about her words resonated within him, stirring up fragments of memories he couldn't quite grasp. His own childhood had been shaped by absence, by unanswered questions. His mother had raised him alone, and though she had always been strong, he had grown up feeling the void of a missing father. But that was a lifetime ago. This was now. And Daniel needed him. Unraveling the mystery, the test results confirmed what Ethan and Dr. Grant had feared. Daniel was battling a severe bacterial infection that had gone untreated for too long. If Ethan hadn't found him when he did, The boy's organs could have started shutting down. "We need to get him into surgery," Dr. Grant said, reviewing the scans. "There's significant inflammation near his appendix, and his white cell count is through the roof. This isn't something antibiotics alone can fix." Ethan nodded. "I'll notify the surgical team. The sooner we operate, the better his chances." Miss Parker's face paled at the word surgery. Is he going to be okay?" Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to do everything we can. Daniel's strong. And so are you." The woman exhaled shakily. I can't lose him. He's all I have." A heavy silence stretched between them. Ethan hesitated before speaking again, but the question had been burning in his mind since the moment she walked through the door. "Miss Parker, I know this might sound strange, but have we met before?" The woman's brow furrowed. "I don't think so," she said slowly. "Why?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. I feel like I've seen you before." Miss Parker studied him carefully, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Dr. Collins, do you have any family around here?" she asked, her voice suddenly guarded. Ethan hesitated. "No, my mother moved to another state years ago. It's just me now." Miss Parker's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but before Ethan could press further, a nurse entered the room. "Dr. Collins, the surgical suite is ready." Ethan nodded, refocusing on what mattered most. "All right, let's get Daniel prepped." But as he walked toward the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night was only the beginning of something much bigger, something that had been waiting in the shadows for years. And now it was finally coming to light. The weight of the past. The operating room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the hum of the ventilator. Ethan stood over the small, frail body of the boy he had rescued, his hands steady as he worked alongside Dr. Grant. The infection had spread further than anticipated. The appendix was close to rupturing, and inflammation had caused additional complications. But Ethan was methodical, precise. Years of experience guided his hands, and he refused to let this child slip away. He wouldn't fail Daniel. Not now. Not ever. After 2 grueling hours, the surgery was complete. The infection was contained, and Daniel had been stabilized. As Ethan removed his surgical gloves and let out a slow breath, a quiet relief settled in his chest. He had saved Daniel's life, but something told him the real battle was only just beginning. A revelation in the dark. Later that night, long after the surgery was over and Daniel was resting in recovery, Ethan sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. Something wasn't adding up. The familiarity of Miss Parker, the strange connection he felt with Daniel. It gnawed at him, demanding answers. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally typed the words that had been echoing in his mind all day. Birth records, Daniel Parker. He hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding. Then he pressed enter. The search results loaded, and as he scrolled through the records, his breath caught in his throat. Mother, Angela Parker. Father, unknown. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He clicked deeper, pulling up Daniel's hospital records from birth. And then his world stopped. Father's name, unverified. Ethan Collins. The room spun. His mind screamed in protest. No, it wasn't possible. But the truth was staring him in the face. The boy he had saved. The child who had collapsed on the street. The patient whose life he had fought for in the operating room. Was his son. The truth that shattered everything. The fluorescent glow of his office cast pale streaks across the darkened room, but Dr. Ethan Collins barely noticed. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the keyboard, his pulse pounding in his ears. He blinked, staring at the screen, willing the words to change. Father's name, unverified. Ethan Collins. The letters glared back at him, unyielding, unchangeable. His breath caught in his throat as his mind raced. How? His memories twisted and tangled, dragging him into a past he had long buried. Years ago, a time before his medical career consumed his life, a time before he had distanced himself from everything that had once mattered. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to dig through the haze of forgotten days. 12 years ago, the summer air had been thick with humidity, wrapping the city in a suffocating embrace. Ethan had just completed his medical internship, his ambitions burning hotter than the July sun. He had been young, driven, determined to carve out a future in medicine that would make his mother proud. But there had been a moment, a brief, unexpected detour in his relentless pursuit of success. Her name was Angela. He had met her at a charity event hosted by the hospital, a small fundraiser for underprivileged families who struggled to afford health care. She had been volunteering at the registration desk, her dark curls pulled into a messy bun, laughter in her eyes. She had been nothing like the women Ethan usually found himself drawn to. She was fire and warmth, fierce independence wrapped in a gentle kindness that had disarmed him instantly. Their connection had been undeniable. One evening turned into two. Two turned into weeks. But Ethan's career had always been his priority. When the opportunity came for him to transfer to a prestigious research program across the country, he hadn't hesitated. Angela had never asked him to stay. And Ethan, selfishly, blindly, hadn't thought to ask if she needed him to. The night before he left, she had seemed different, quiet, hesitant. There had been something in her eyes, something unspoken that lingered on her lips, but she never said the words. And Ethan had walked away. Had he known? Had he ignored the possibility? Or had he simply been too consumed by his own ambitions to see what had been right in front of him? Back in the present, Ethan's stomach twisted as he stared at the screen, nausea rising like a wave. Daniel wasn't just a boy he had saved. He was my son. A rush of emotions, guilt, disbelief, a fierce protectiveness, crashed over him all at once. He had unknowingly abandoned his own child. How had Angela never told him? Did she hate him that much? Had she believed he wouldn't care? He scrubbed a hand over his face, his mind a chaotic mess. There was only one person who could give him the answers he desperately needed. Angela Parker. A confrontation years in the making. The hallway leading to Daniel's hospital room felt longer than usual. Each step felt heavier, the weight of the revelation pressing down on Ethan's chest. He paused outside the door, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. Inside, Angela sat beside Daniel's hospital bed, her head resting lightly on the mattress as she held his small hand in hers. She looked exhausted, drained. But she looked like a mother who had never once wavered in her love. Ethan swallowed hard and knocked lightly. Angela's head jerked up, her tired eyes meeting his. "Dr. Collins?" she asked, surprised. Ethan closed the door behind him, his pulse racing. "I need to talk to you." She frowned, sitting up straighter. "Is something wrong? Is Daniel?" "He's stable," Ethan reassured her quickly. "That's not why I'm here." Angela's shoulders relaxed slightly, but her wariness remained. "Then what is it?" Ethan exhaled, his chest tight. "I know." Angela's brow furrowed. "Know what?" He hesitated, the words thick in his throat. "I know that Daniel is mine." Silence. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Angela's expression remained unreadable. Then, slowly, she let out a sigh and looked away. "I figured you'd find out eventually," she murmured. Ethan's breath hitched. "So it's true." She nodded. A heavy silence stretched between them, filled with a decade's worth of unspoken words. Ethan's hands curled at his sides. "Why didn't you tell me?" Angela let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You left, Ethan. You had your dreams, your future planned out. I wasn't going to stand in your way. I wasn't going to ask you to stay for something you never even wanted. I had a right to know," Ethan argued, his voice sharper than he intended. Angela's eyes darkened. "And what would you have done, Ethan? Would you have dropped everything, changed your entire life? Or would you have resented me? Resented him? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. Because deep down, he didn't know the answer. Would he have stayed? Or would he have done exactly what she feared? Angela shook her head, her voice softer now. I made the best choice I could for Daniel. I gave him a life without expectations, without the pain of knowing his father chose something else over him. Ethan's chest ached. I never would have. But you did, Ethan, she interrupted gently. You left. And I did what I had to do. Ethan raked a hand through his hair, his mind swirling. I didn't know. Angela's expression softened, but there was still pain in her eyes. I don't hate you, Ethan. And I don't regret having Daniel. He's my everything. Ethan swallowed past the lump in his throat. I want to be in his life, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I don't know how yet, but I want to try. Angela studied him for a long moment, searching his face for sincerity. Then she nodded. He deserves to know who you are, she admitted. But this isn't just about you. This is about what's best for him. Ethan nodded. I understand. Angela sighed. All right then, Dr. Collins. Let's see if you're up for the challenge. Ethan exhaled, his hands trembling slightly. Because for the first time in his life, the future was uncertain. But for the first time in his life, he was determined to fight for something more than just his career. He was going to fight for his son. A father's reckoning. The weight of the revelation hung over Ethan like a storm cloud, crackling with electricity, promising upheaval. He had walked into the hospital that morning expecting just another routine day. A young boy in crisis, a life saved, and another file added to his list of successful cases. Instead, he had found a son he never knew he had. Daniel was his. The truth burned in his chest, a mixture of shame, disbelief, and something unexpected, hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope meant responsibility. Hope meant rewriting the last 12 years of his life and figuring out how to become a father overnight. And Ethan had no idea how to do that. Shadows of the past. Ethan barely registered the drive home. The neon glow of the city blurred past his windshield, but his mind was stuck in the past, clawing through fragments of memory, trying to reconcile the man he had been with the man he needed to become. His apartment felt cold when he walked in, the air stale from days of neglect. He hadn't been home much lately. Too many overnight shifts, too many emergencies. His job had always been his excuse, his shield, his reason for never settling down. He had convinced himself he was fine with that. But now, a pair of deep brown eyes haunted him. Eyes that looked too much like his own. Pouring himself a glass of water, he leaned against the kitchen counter and exhaled. 12 years. Angela had kept Daniel from him for 12 years. A surge of anger flared in his chest, but it was quickly extinguished by something deeper, regret. Could he really blame her? He had left without looking back. He had been so consumed with his career, with proving himself, that he had never stopped to wonder what he might have been leaving behind. Had she ever thought about reaching out? Had she ever doubted her decision? And what about Daniel? Had he ever asked about his father? The thought nearly broke him. What if he hates me? Shaking his head, Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he hadn't called in years. Mom. His thumb hovered over the call button before he finally pressed it. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice filled the line. Ethan, it's late. Is everything okay? He exhaled slowly. Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Something big. There was a pause. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Ethan closed his eyes. I have a son. Silence. For a long moment, nothing but the faint static of the phone line filled the space between them. Then, his mother inhaled sharply. Ethan, what do you mean? His name is Daniel. He's 8 years old. I just found out today. His mother never told me. His mother let out a soft gasp. Oh my God. Ethan. I don't know what to do, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to be a father. I wasn't prepared for this. His mother's voice softened. No one is ever prepared, sweetheart. But the fact that you care enough to worry about it means you're already trying. That's more than a lot of fathers do. Ethan swallowed hard. He was so sick, Mom. If I hadn't found him, I don't even want to think about what would have happened. His mother was quiet for a long moment. When are you going to see him again? She finally asked. Tomorrow, Ethan said, but I don't even know what to say to him. His mother's voice was gentle but firm. Start with the truth, Ethan. Tell him who you are. And then, listen. Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Yeah, okay. You're not alone in this, sweetheart, his mother reassured him. And neither is he. You'll figure it out together. As he hung up the phone, Ethan felt a little lighter. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just making decisions for himself. He had someone else to fight for now. First steps. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing outside Daniel's hospital room, his heart hammering like a war drum in his chest. He had spent his entire career performing surgeries, making life and death decisions under immense pressure. And yet, nothing had ever terrified him more than knocking on that door. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open. Inside, Angela sat by Daniel's bedside, flipping through a children's book as Daniel slowly blinked awake. The little boy's gaze flickered toward Ethan, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Angela looked between them before clearing her throat. Daniel, sweetie, there's someone I want you to meet. Daniel rubbed his eyes sleepily. Dr. Collins, he mumbled, his voice scratchy. Ethan's throat tightened. Angela hesitated before speaking again. Daniel, Dr. Collins isn't just your doctor. The little boy blinked, confused. What do you mean? Ethan knelt beside the bed, his heart in his throat. I mean, he exhaled slowly. I'm your father, Daniel. The room fell silent. Daniel's expression didn't change at first. His small fingers curled into the hospital blanket, his brows furrowed in thought. Then, finally, he spoke. You're my dad. Ethan nodded, his mouth dry. Yes, I didn't know before, but I do now. And I want to be in your life, if you'll let me. Daniel studied him carefully, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Mom never told me about you, he finally said. Ethan's chest ached. I know, and I'm sorry for that. Daniel tilted his head. Are you gonna leave again? The question hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. He forced himself to meet Daniel's eyes, his voice steady. No, I won't leave. Not ever again. Daniel was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached out a small hand. Ethan barely had time to react before Daniel's fingers curled around his own. A silent understanding passed between them. A promise. A beginning. Angela wiped at her eyes discreetly, but Ethan caught it. This was just the start. But for the first time in his life, Ethan knew exactly where he was meant to be. Right here, with his son. Ethan barely felt the pressure of Daniel's small hand wrapped around his own, yet it held him tighter than any surgical knot he had ever tied. His entire world had shifted in the past 24 hours, but nothing compared to the weight of this moment. Daniel's fingers were warm but weak, his small body still fighting the aftermath of his infection. He looked up at Ethan with cautious curiosity, his deep brown eyes searching his face for answers Ethan wasn't sure he had. You're really my dad? Daniel asked again, his voice quiet, hesitant. Ethan nodded. Yeah, buddy, I really am. Daniel was silent for a moment, his small fingers playing with the blanket on his lap. Then, where have you been? The question struck Ethan like a scalpel to the chest. Angela flinched slightly but said nothing, allowing Ethan to answer on his own. Ethan took a slow breath, steadying himself. I didn't know about you, he admitted. Your mom. She didn't tell me. Daniel glanced at Angela, his expression unreadable. Why? Angela exhaled and reached out, gently smoothing a curl from her son's forehead. "Because I wasn't sure if you wanted to be here, baby." Daniel frowned. "But I still should have known, right?" Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You're right," he said, squeezing Daniel's hand gently. "You should have known. And I should have been here from the beginning. I didn't get that chance before, but I want it now." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "You're a doctor?" Ethan smiled despite himself. "Yeah, I am." Daniel tilted his head. "That's cool. I want to be a doctor too." A deep warmth spread through Ethan's chest, an overwhelming mixture of pride and sadness. "Yeah." Daniel nodded, his little fingers tightening around Ethan's. "Yeah, you saved me, right?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Yeah, buddy, I did." Daniel's lips curled into the smallest smile. "Then maybe I can save people too." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "I think you make an incredible doctor," he said. "But you don't have to decide that now. You've got plenty of time to figure out what you want to be." Daniel's smile faded slightly. "But what if I want to be your son first?" Ethan's heart clenched so tightly it hurt. "You already are, Daniel," he whispered. "And I'm so lucky for that." Angela wiped her eyes again, then cleared her throat. "Daniel needs rest," she said softly. "And we all need time to process this." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken request. "I'll be back," he promised, looking Daniel in the eyes. "Every day. I'll be here." Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Ethan smiled, giving his hand one last squeeze before standing. He looked at Angela, who met his gaze with an unreadable expression. "I'd like to talk to you alone," she murmured. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who was already blinking sleepily against the pillows. "Okay," he agreed. They stepped outside the room, closing the door softly behind them. Confrontation in the hallway. Angela crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the wall. Her expression was unreadable, but Ethan could see the wariness in her posture. "You handled that well," she admitted, "but this isn't just about you and Daniel." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I know." Angela studied him, as if searching for cracks in his resolve. "You left Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And I made peace with that a long time ago. But Daniel, he's just a kid. He doesn't deserve to be let down." Ethan felt that accusation deep in his bones. "I won't let him down, Angela." She shook her head. "It's not just about showing up now because you found out the truth. Being a father is more than that. It's about being there for the good and the bad. It's about making sacrifices, even when it's hard. Are you ready for that?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "I don't know if I have all the answers right now, but I know I want to be in his life. I know I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Angela sighed, rubbing her temples. "I need time to process this, Ethan. We both do. But most importantly, Daniel does. He's smart, but he's still just a little boy. He needs stability." Ethan nodded. "I get that. And I don't expect you to just hand over trust overnight. But I'll prove it to you. To both of you." Angela met his gaze again, her expression softening just slightly. "Then start small. Visit. Be consistent. Let him decide how he feels about you in his own time." Ethan nodded, determination settling deep in his chest. "I will." Angela studied him for a long moment before finally exhaling. "All right, Dr. Collins. Let's see if you're serious about being a father." Ethan nodded, but inside, he already knew. He had never been more serious about anything in his life. A new beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of small steps. Ethan visited Daniel every evening after his shift, bringing books about space, dinosaurs, and even a kid-friendly medical encyclopedia. They talked about superheroes, hospital machines, and whether Ethan had ever seen a real-life zombie. Daniel was disappointed to learn the answer was no. Ethan learned that Daniel loved basketball, but had never played on a real team. He loved science but hated spelling. His favorite food was macaroni and cheese, but only when it was homemade, not the orange box stuff. And slowly, bit by bit, Daniel started to trust him. One evening, as Ethan was tucking him in, Daniel hesitated before speaking. "Do you think, maybe, we could hang out sometime?" Outside of the hospital, Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I'd love that, buddy." Daniel smiled, settling into his pillow. "Cool." Angela stood by the door, watching the exchange with cautious approval. "Good night, Daniel," Ethan said softly. Daniel yawned. "Good night, Dad." Ethan froze. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and new. Angela's lips parted slightly in surprise, but she said nothing. Ethan swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Good night, son." And as he walked out of the room, his heart felt fuller than it ever had before. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a doctor. He was a father, and he was never letting go again. A father's trial. The hospital corridors were quieter at night, their usual symphony of hurried footsteps and urgent voices reduced to a distant murmur. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over the linoleum floors, and the scent of antiseptic clung to the air. Ethan Collins stood outside Daniel's hospital room, hesitating for the first time in days. He had been coming here every night after his shift, learning the rhythm of his son's life, slowly piecing together what he had missed. But tonight, everything felt different. Tonight, Daniel had called him Dad. The word echoed in his mind, filling spaces that had once felt empty. It was just one word, one syllable, but it carried the weight of something Ethan had never dared to imagine: belonging. As he exhaled, he turned to find Angela leaning against the wall nearby, her arms crossed as she studied him. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ethan let out a breathless chuckle. "I should be asking you that." Angela's lips curved into something almost like a smile, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "Daniel's never had a father before, Ethan. He's never even asked about one. I think he's scared to hope for something that might not last." Ethan's chest tightened. "I won't let him down." Angela sighed. "You keep saying that, and I want to believe you, but words are easy, Ethan. Proving it, that's harder." He nodded. "I know, and I'm not asking you to trust me overnight, but I will prove it, to both of you." Angela studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Then let's start small." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How small?" Angela crossed her arms. "Daniel's being discharged in 2 days. I want you to help me bring him home." A new reality. 2 days later, Ethan stood beside Angela as they wheeled Daniel out of the hospital. The boy was bundled up in a hoodie several sizes too big, his small frame still weak from his infection. But there was an unmistakable excitement in his eyes. "This is so weird," Daniel mumbled, gripping the armrests of the wheelchair as they made their way to the hospital exit. "What is?" Ethan asked, matching his pace. "Leaving the hospital with 2 parents," Daniel said. "It's like a whole extra person showed up out of nowhere." Ethan smirked. "Surprise." Daniel grinned, but Angela cut a glance at Ethan. "Don't joke about that. He's still getting used to this." Ethan's expression softened. "I know, but if I can make him smile, I will." Angela sighed but didn't argue. As they reached the parking lot, Angela helped Daniel into the back seat of her car, adjusting his seatbelt while Ethan loaded his small duffel bag into the trunk. Before climbing in, Ethan hesitated. "So, how does this work?" Angela raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I mean, am I allowed to come in? Should I wait outside? Do we have some kind of co-parenting rulebook I should know about?" Angela stared at him for a moment before shaking her head. "You really have no idea what you're doing, do you?" "Not even a little," Ethan admitted. Angela sighed. "Get in the car, Collins." Ethan grinned as he climbed into the passenger seat. The Parker home. The ride to Angela's apartment was quiet, the kind of silence filled with unspoken thoughts and cautious hope. Daniel, exhausted from the past few days, dozed off against the window. Ethan took the opportunity to glance at Angela. "You've done a great job with him." Angela kept her eyes on the road. "I've done my best." Ethan hesitated. "I know I can't change the past, Angela, but I want to be a part of his life. A real part, not just a visitor." Angela tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Then prove it, because I won't let you break his heart." Ethan nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to." When they finally arrived, Angela parked in front of a modest apartment complex. The building was older, but it was clean, the kind of place that felt lived in, full of stories. Ethan got out first, opening the backseat door and carefully unbuckling Daniel's seatbelt. The boy stirred, blinking up at him sleepily. "We're home, buddy," Ethan said softly. Daniel yawned, rubbing his eyes. "Oh, cool." Ethan chuckled. "That's the enthusiasm I was hoping for." Angela rolled her eyes. "Come on, let's get inside." Inside, the apartment was small but cozy. A couch sat against the far wall, covered in mismatched blankets, and a few framed photos hung beside the television. A bookshelf stood in the corner, cluttered with children's books and medical pamphlets, proof of the life Angela had built, the battle she had fought alone. Ethan swallowed hard. She really did all of this by herself. As he helped Daniel settle onto the couch, Angela disappeared into the kitchen. "So," Daniel stretched his arms, looking around. "Now what?" Ethan smirked. "I was gonna ask you the same thing." Daniel squinted at him. "You really don't know how to be a dad, do you?" Ethan chuckled. "Nope, but I'm a fast learner." Daniel grinned. "Good, 'cause I have a lot of ideas." Angela returned with a bowl of soup, setting it down on the table. "First idea, eat. Second, rest." Daniel pouted but obeyed. Ethan watched, his heart swelling with something new, something he hadn't known he was missing. This was family. Growing pains. The next few weeks were an adjustment, on all sides. Ethan started visiting daily, showing up after work with takeout or groceries, making a conscious effort to be present. He helped with Daniel's physical therapy, picked him up from school, even endured a grueling 4-hour Star Wars marathon when Daniel insisted it was essential for bonding. It wasn't always smooth. Daniel had moments of hesitation, times where he flinched when Ethan reached out, times where he asked tentative questions like, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" as if still unsure of the answer. Angela, too, was slow to trust. She set boundaries. She corrected him when he overstepped. She reminded him, constantly, that being a father was a lifelong commitment, not a short-term project. Ethan listened, and for the first time in his life, he stayed, breaking through. One night, as Ethan tucked Daniel in, the boy suddenly frowned. "Dad?" Ethan's heart clenched at the word. He still wasn't used to it. "Yeah, buddy." Daniel hesitated, fiddling with the corner of his blanket. "Are you mad at Mom?" Ethan blinked. "What? No. Why would you think that?" Daniel shrugged. "You left. And she didn't tell you about me. That's gotta make you mad, right?" Ethan exhaled, thinking carefully. "I was upset," he admitted. "But not at your mom. She did what she thought was best. And maybe I wasn't ready back then. But I am now." Daniel looked up at him, searching for any hint of a lie. "You promise?" Ethan reached out, gently squeezing his hand. "I promise." Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." As he closed his eyes, Ethan sat beside him, watching his son drift into sleep. He had spent his whole life chasing purpose, and now he had found it. Not in surgery, not in success, not in accolades, but in this small 8-year-old boy, his son. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. The legacy of a father. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, And slowly, life took on a new rhythm, one that included Ethan in ways he had never imagined. He had thought saving lives in the operating room was the most rewarding thing he would ever do. He had thought the adrenaline of surgery, the thrill of making impossible decisions in seconds, was his purpose. But now, he was learning something new. That purpose wasn't just about what you did, it was about who you did it for. And for the first time in his life, he was doing something that truly mattered. He was becoming a father, adjusting to family life. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when Daniel would hesitate before calling him Dad, as if testing whether it still felt right. Times when Ethan would reach for a hug only to second-guess himself. Angela was cautious, keeping a watchful eye on every interaction, making sure Ethan followed through on his promises. But little by little, they found their way. Ethan picked up Daniel from school whenever he could. He took him to doctor's appointments, made sure he had everything he needed for his physical therapy. He sat through endless conversations about superheroes and video games and space, learning about the things that made his son's world feel big and exciting. And every night, when he left Angela's apartment, Daniel would look at him and say, "See you tomorrow." And every night, Ethan would smile and say, "Always." The test of commitment. One evening, as Ethan arrived at Angela's apartment, he found Daniel sitting on the couch, his face tense with frustration. "Hey, buddy," Ethan greeted, setting down a bag of takeout. "What's up?" Daniel crossed his arms. "There's a Father-Son Day at school this weekend." Ethan's chest tightened. "That sounds cool." Daniel didn't look at him. "I don't have a dad to take me." Ethan's heart cracked at the words. "Daniel." Angela walked in from the kitchen, pausing when she saw the tension in the room. She glanced between them, but said nothing. Ethan crouched in front of Daniel, gently placing a hand on his knee. "Do you want me to come with you?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know. I mean, people might ask questions." "About me?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah. About why you weren't there before." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had spent months earning Daniel's trust, proving that he was here to stay. But the past still lingered like a shadow over them. "You don't have to explain anything to anyone," Ethan said carefully. "But if you want me there, I'll be there. No matter what." Daniel bit his lip. "Okay. But you better not be late." Ethan smiled. "Not a chance." Father-Son Day. Saturday morning, Ethan stood outside Daniel's school, his pulse oddly quickened. He had performed heart transplants, saved lives with seconds to spare, but somehow, walking into an elementary school gymnasium with his son made him more nervous than anything else. Angela had insisted on dropping them off, watching from the car with an unreadable expression as Daniel led Ethan inside. The gym was filled with fathers and their sons, playing games, laughing, throwing footballs. Ethan felt the weight of curious glances as he and Daniel walked in, but he ignored them. Daniel led him to a table where a few other kids were sitting, and Ethan could feel the hesitation in his son's movements. "You okay, buddy?" Daniel sighed. "Some kids might say stuff." Ethan crouched to his level. "Look at me." Daniel met his eyes. "If anyone gives you a hard time, you just tell them this. My dad is a surgeon. He saves lives. And he's really good at dodgeball." Daniel cracked a grin. "You're good at dodgeball." Ethan smirked. "Absolutely not. But they don't know that." Daniel giggled, some of the tension easing from his small shoulders. And for the rest of the event, Ethan made sure his son knew he wasn't alone anymore. An unexpected moment with Angela. Later that evening, after dropping Daniel off at Angela's, Ethan lingered in the doorway. Angela folded her arms. "You don't have to keep proving yourself, you know." Ethan met her gaze. "Yes, I do." Angela exhaled. "He's happy. I haven't seen him like this in a long time."